Fight for the unborn. The head of Planned Parenthood joins pro-abortion lawmakers for a rally on Capitol Hill. A pro-life member of the Trump administration responds. Supporting the church. The Holy See's mission to the United Nations honors a group helping refugees. And an interview with the French priest who risked his life to save relics from the fire at Notre Dame. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, May 23rd, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The head of the House Democrats' campaign arm pulls out of a fundraiser for Illinois pro-life Democrat Dan Lipinski. Pro-abortion groups want to beat him in next year's Democratic primary. Their cries are growing louder as states like Alabama pass new abortion bans. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi tells us more. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee helps elect Democrats, and pro-life Democrat Dan Lipinski is going to need as much help as he can get. He won last year's primary against liberal challenger Marie Newman by just about 2,000 votes. He's going to face her again in 2020. This is a raging battle for Democrats.
Democrats defend abortion. 2 rallies, 1 day.
I believe we're at a war. I really do.
A war over the future of abortion.
We see state after state propose these draconian measures, a measure that would put doctors potentially in prison for up to 99 years. America is watching.
Last week, Alabama passed a law to ban most abortions. Is this going to backfire in 2020? Why not?
No, I think that it's time for all of us in America to understand that Roe v. Wade needs to be reviewed.
That's the heart of a 40-year national debate.
This is what democracy looks like.
Supporters of Roe on Tuesday rallied across the country.
Abortion is a human right.
Some abortion supporters stormed the offices of Rhode Island Senate President after a bill to protect abortion failed. Abortion supporters also target Congressman Dan Lipinski. The Democrat voted for pro-life bills like banning most abortions at 20 weeks of pregnancy.
The Democratic Party is supposed to be about protecting the vulnerable, so I see it perfectly in fitting with the Democratic Party.
The Democrats' campaign chairwoman pulled out of a fundraiser for him. However, she says every dollar spent trying to defeat one of our Democratic incumbents is a dollar that we cannot spend defeating Republicans. Today, I asked Democrats about the issue.
Is there room for pro-lifers in the Democratic Party?
One of the great enemies here is fear that is generated by the people who fail to understand that these are fundamental human rights and legal rights.
They should ask politicians, do they support a woman's right to reproductive choice?
That's the 2020 test for some voters as Dan Lipinski fights for his political life.
This is a pretty tricky issue for House Democrats. I spoke to 2 of them running for president, Representative Tim Ryan and Representative Seth Moulton. Both wouldn't comment about Lipinski's case. A recent Morning Consult poll finds 56% of voters oppose the laws like the one in Alabama and the heartbeat bill, which bans abortions as soon as the unborn baby's heartbeat can be detected. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. White House counselor Kellyanne Conway defends states like Georgia and Alabama, which recently passed strong pro-life protections, and criticizes others like New York and Virginia that support late-term abortion.
If you're going to talk about Alabama, please talk about Virginia. If you're going to talk about extremism, please talk about dismembered babies. I can tell what they look like. They're 8th and 9th month. There they are. Talk about partial birth abortion. Talk about sex selection abortion. People who go and get a gender test and then schedule an abortion.
Your view is that the
Conway told News Nightly that Democratic frontrunner Joe Biden is becoming even more extreme on abortion. He previously supported the Hyde Amendment that keeps taxpayer money from paying for abortion, but now he doesn't. A new report suggests the Pentagon will propose a plan to send 10,000 more U.S. troops to the Middle East. The goal wouldn't be to go to war, but to beef up defenses against potential threats from Iran. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby joins us with more from the Pentagon. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Top defense officials here have not confirmed the proposal for more troops, but several reports say if it's accepted by the White House, the addition would be defensive forces and may include Patriot missile batteries, more ships, and increased efforts to monitor Iran.
According to 3 U.S. officials, the Pentagon is scheduled to detail their troop increase proposal to senior members of President Trump's national security team. Tensions between the U.S. and Iran have reached an all-time high as the Trump administration pushes its maximum pressure campaign through tough economic sanctions. There are signs of tension among Iranian leadership. Today, the supreme leader publicly chastised his own president and foreign minister. He says they did not address his concerns when they agreed to the Iran nuclear deal in 2015. The deal lost momentum last year when President Trump withdrew the U.S. from it. On Tuesday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan briefed Congress on the situation.
Our biggest focus at this point is to prevent Iranian miscalculation.
Shanahan did not mention the proposed troop increase specifically, but says the military will protect U.S. interests in the Middle East.
We do not want the situation to escalate. This is about deterrence, not about war. We're not about going to war.
Officials say the president must approve any significant deployment of troops. But if he approves, would it bring Iran to the table? I asked Army veteran and national security expert James Carafano.
From what we hear about people on the ground, that the Iranians have gotten the message. This reminds me of kind of like 2 gangs staying across the street, yelling at each other, but it's very clear neither one of them is going to cross the street and start throwing punches. I think my sense is the Iranians are perfectly happy to kind of keep this at the rhetorical level.
While he's not expecting a war, Carafano says Iran is funding militias around the region and carrying out attacks against the U.S. and its allies. The Trump administration has evacuated non-essential personnel from neighboring Iraq due to threats from those groups. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the Pentagon. Thank you, Wyatt. And that evacuation of government employees from Iraq raises concerns about Christians left behind. The Trump administration says it remains committed to persecuted Christians in the Middle East. Vice President Mike Pence addressed that issue today. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The Vice President's office tells me a government official overseeing aid to minority communities, including Christians in Iraq, will remain despite the withdrawal of U.S. personnel. Still, questions remain about the faithful living in the birthplace of Christianity.
There's concern for Christian communities in the Middle East after the U.S. State Department decided to evacuate all non-emergency U.S. government employees from Iraq. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders gives her reaction to News Nightly.
Certainly we hope that this isn't long-term or something that lasts an extensive amount of time, and that the tensions there will ease and those individuals will return back to their work.
The Trump administration made the decision to pull out personnel as U.S. tension escalates with Iran, Iraq's neighbor. Tawfiq Baklini, a leading voice for Middle East Christians, hopes the U.S. will still provide support.
Keep the U.S. government and the Pentagon involved, and to have it should be a safe area, a safe zone, protected by air.
And in Iraq, Catholic Archbishop Bashar Warda says the 2011 U.S. pullout from Iraq created a vacuum, allowing ISIS to emerge. He urgently writes, a new vacuum created by American disengagement will likely meet with a similarly unhappy result. In 2016, then Secretary of State John Kerry admitted a genocide targeting religious groups was being carried out by ISIS, also referred to as Daesh.
In my judgment, Daesh is responsible for genocide against groups in areas under its control, including Yazidis, Christians, and Shia Muslims.
And now, even though ISIS has lost control of the territory, Christians stand in the rubble in a region known as the birthplace of their faith.
In many areas in Iraq, they still speak the Aramaic language. It's the original language of Christ. This is where it all began.
Lauren, a Trump administration official tells me today's meeting led by the vice president would convey the U.S. commitment to minority communities, including Christians in Iraq, despite the security threat posed by Iran. At this point, it's not clear when U.S. personnel would be allowed back into the country. Lauren.
White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. Voting begins today in the European Parliament elections. It will last until Monday and includes more than 24 countries. More than 750 seats are up for grabs. Elected officials pass hundreds of laws each year for the EU. A Catholic group is calling for people around the world to work together to help migrants, and a church leader is highlighting the support Caritas International is receiving from Pope Francis.
The fact that the Pope agreed to meet us twice, no? The opening Mass and then an audience, speaks of how much he has placed, how much value he has placed on the service of charity.
Cardinal Luis Tagle was speaking at the beginning of the group's General Assembly in Rome. Here he places a photo as part of a giant collage of pictures of migrants from the past and present. A Catholic priest became a hero last month after he raced into burning Notre Dame Cathedral to save priceless relics, including the crown of thorns. Father Jean-Marc Fournier is the chaplain for the Paris Fire Department. He described the harrowing day at Notre Dame to National Catholic Register in a rare interview. Solene Tadie joins us from Rome. Solene, tell us about him. Tell us about this man.
Well, I saw him in his diocese of the French army in Paris, and I was struck by his humility and serenity in the middle of the media hype that followed the blaze in Notre Dame. He's a man of faith. As the chaplain of the firefighters, he likes to say that they have a motto: altruism, efficiency, and discretion. And from what I saw, I could say Father Fournier fits quite well with such a motto. So as a chaplain, he's dealing every day with pain and sadness and death, and he tries to heal both the bodies and the souls of people around him, and to give a little bit of peace in the oceans of pain in life.
Tell me
and
why,
this is what struck me so much about him.
Yeah, tell me why he risked his life to get the crown of thorns.
We discussed that as well. He told me he wasn't afraid because he's a man of faith, and he was willing to risk his life to save the holy relics. And actually, I think he didn't have so much time to be afraid, as he had only a few minutes to get inside the cathedral with the firefighters in order to save the relics on time. But he told me it was so important for him to take such an important step to save the Blessed Sacrament, as it is the real presence of our Lord, and the crown of thorns, which represents a very intimate symbol of the Christian faith. And that's why he told me he was willing to risk his life, because it is the very symbol of our faith.
He's been called to the scenes of major terror attacks in Paris, and he was in Afghanistan during an ambush in 2008. Does he fear death? Why does he keep doing this?
Well, Father Fournier lost 10 friends in Afghanistan. It was terrible. And then he was on the scene, as you told me, of the major terror attacks in Paris. And he prayed over the victims, and he gave a collective absolution. His faith helped him every time. He told me he has the strength to carry on because he knows he's a kind of pilgrim on this earth. He knows we're all moving toward eternity, and eternity is not on this earth. And this gives him the strength to move on all the time. And he told me also that the awareness of our finitude gives him the will to live the incarnation, and to maybe to cry with those who cry, and to love with those who love. And this is what is so moving and so inspiring about him, about his testimony, about his mission.
You can read Solene's article at ncregister.com. Solene Tadie, thank you so much for joining us. You're the European correspondent for National Catholic Register. Okay, take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, a report from the UN about the United Nations honoring a group helping refugees. And an update on the American arrested after he joined the Taliban. The number of Christians persecuted in the world today is greater than at any point in history. One group that dedicates itself to helping persecuted Christians in Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America is this group, Aid to the Church in Need. This Catholic organization was founded 70 years ago by a Dutch priest who set out to meet the needs of the suffering church in post-World War II Germany. Joining us now from the United Nations in New York is Sabrina Farisi, our UN correspondent. Sabrina, this is an issue important to the Holy See mission to the UN.
Yes. The Holy See mission has been talking about the issue of persecuted Christians for many, many years. And it's interesting because many times at the UN, it seems that not everyone realizes how big of a problem it is. But I found out last night that a resolution just passed for the first time with the word Christianophobia in a UN resolution. So they talked about how anti-Semitism was not acceptable, anti-Muslim, and Christianophobia. So it seems that people are starting to understand, even at the UN, how big of a problem Christian persecution is.
And there's an organization that we've had on, Aid to the Church in Need. Talk about the range and scope of the projects. I know they received an award last night.
Yes. Aid to the Church in Need gave out last year $120 million to 5,000 projects in 145 countries. When I spoke yesterday to George Marlin, the executive director of Aid to the Church in Need USA, he said, we don't just talk the talk, we act. So they have projects in Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, Asia. As an example, in Syria, which is in its 8th year of a civil war, they have given $33 million to 738 projects. And even in Sri Lanka, which recently had that bombing, that horrific bombing on Easter Sunday, they immediately sent delegates to meet with the Archbishop of Colombo.
Wow, that is impressive. Those bombings across Sri Lanka were terrible. You know, one issue is also, I find this a lot, how little the media covers the issue of persecuted Christians.
Yes. This came up a lot last night. I spoke with Father Roger Landry of the Holy See Mission, and he said that we need to speak up as Christians, and we need to learn from our Jewish brothers and sisters who are always speaking up when something bad happens in their community. It seems that a lot of times in the secular media, there's a bit of a fear to talk about it because people don't want to appear to be anti-Muslim. But we can't afford to be silent. And actually, another thing I heard last night is that EWTN is one of the only networks that is regularly and constantly speaking about the plight of persecuted Christians.
Well, it's a big issue for me. I traveled to Iraq and wanted to see it firsthand because the numbers are just horrific of how many people, how many Christians have moved away and are afraid to practice their faith. Anyway, thank you so much, Sabrina Farisi, reporting from the United Nations.
Thank you, Lauren.
A California man who was arrested after he joined the Taliban has been released from prison. John Walker Lind was captured in 2001 on an Afghanistan battlefield. He spent more than 17 years in prison and was released early for good behavior in Indiana. A judge imposed additional restrictions on Lind, including monitoring his internet use. Up next, the importance of faith and the family. Two film projects are leaving Georgia after the governor signed a heartbeat bill. The measure was passed earlier this month. Immediately after the passage, several actors threatened to boycott the state. The law is expected to go into effect January 1st, but may be delayed by legal challenges. Bishop Robert Baker of the Diocese of Birmingham tells EWTN's Pro-Life Weekly he wants all Catholics to read the Alabama law on abortion so we can advocate for it.
Crafted carefully, I suggest all our listeners and viewers read it because it is clear pro-life thinking, and the arguments that we present commonly are all in this document.
The bill bans almost all abortions unless the mother's life is in danger, and you can see more of Catherine Hadro's interview tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern on EWTN. A new study is taking a global look at the role religion plays in the health of our relationships and our families. The report by the Institute for Family Studies examines the link between religion and the quality of marriage and its impact on fertility, and seeks to answer the question, is faith a global force for good or ill in the family. Joining me now by Skype from Charlottesville, Virginia, is Brad Wilcox, one of the authors of the study and a senior fellow at the Institute for Family Studies. Brad, welcome back.
It's good to be here today, Lauren.
This study takes a look at 11 countries in the Americas, Europe, Oceania, which includes Polynesia, a big cultural mix in terms of your sample. What did you find as far as religion and attitudes toward marriage across all of those different areas?
Well, generally speaking, what we do find is that people who are religious are more likely to take a favorable view of the importance of marriage and the importance of having two parents in the household.
And what does your data show in terms of the association between religion and family size, especially as it relates to Catholics?
What we see in this data is that people across these countries who attend church regularly are more likely to have kids, and it's actually about a quarter of a kid for women ages basically 18 to 49 across this global sample.
In the U.S., a government report showed that the number of births has fallen for the 4th year in a row, leading to the fewest babies in 32 years. Is that something that's as alarming as it appears?
Yeah, I think it's cause for concern. I mean, I think the issue here is, are we headed towards kind of a Japanese-style pattern where there are so few marriages and so few kids that, the society begins to have difficulties in terms of just people not having kin, the economy not having enough workers, the government not having enough taxpayers. So, the question is whether or not the U.S. is headed on that, that trajectory. We're not there yet, but if this pattern continues, if we continue to see fertility drop, we could be heading towards the kind of pattern that's sort of taken place in countries in Eastern Europe.
And that means that this generation won't replace itself.
That is correct, yes.
I was fascinated by the title of this. Is it for good or for ill, right? For ill? But then I read this section that says your report also took a look at domestic violence, or what you refer to in the study as intimate partner violence, and you did not find that religion protects people from experiencing it.
Yeah, so we have an expansive definition of what's called intimate partner violence. That includes things like hitting, but also things like, serious conflict, controlling behavior. And we find that about 1 in 5 couples are struggling with this, and there isn't a religious advantage. So what we think is that churches, pastors, priests, lay leaders should be a lot more vocal in raising kind of the issue of both domestic violence, but also kind of serious conflict, toxic conflicts in our families across the globe.
What can people of faith do to support or strengthen families who are struggling? You mentioned that churches can play a role there.
Well, I think one thing is just sort of naming the issue. I mean, preaching about this issue. Obviously you have to do it carefully, but also providing support groups too for spouses and couples who are struggling with serious and toxic conflict in their marriages.
Brad Wilcox, thank you so much for joining us. And again, this study is from the Institute for Family Studies, where you are a senior fellow. Thanks, Brad Wilcox, for joining us.
Thanks, Lauren, for having me on.
For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.